Hi everyone, it's Becky here from Ivy's Corner and welcome to my video for Inktober Tangles 2025 day number 1. So if you have already seen, I've done a little intro video all about Inktober and what I'm going to be doing this year for Inktober. And I'm going to get some tangling done for you now. So I thought I would use this lovely little book I've got. Now the paper is actually really delicate because I've just done my front cover and it is extremely soft and delicate paper and there's lots of fibres coming up from it. So this is going to be a bit of a challenge, this series, but I think we're going to have some fun. So I'm going to start off by opening up my little book that I'm using here, and we're going to be drawing the tangle Festune, which is actually a favourite of mine. I feel like I say that all the time about different tangles. And this one is a Zentangle HQ tangle. And I'm going to go straight in with pen here, and I'm going to use a 05 just to cover some nice space on this page. So I'm going to give it a little rub because it is a very fibrous and soft paper. It's a handmade book that's come to me from India. But you can see just the fibres coming off the paper as I give it a little rub, so I do have to be very delicate with it. We're going to draw, for Festune, we're going to be drawing some circles to start with. And there's a few different ways that you can kind of put this tangle together. If you were tangling along with my recent free series, then you would have seen me drawing this tangle. I'm going to start by drawing some nice big circles. And they are going to kind of overlap, sit over and beneath each other. This one's going to hide underneath here. So they kind of look like nice big pebbles that are overlapping each other. Like so. And I'm going to fill this space with these lovely big pebbles. And the key for Festune, I think, is to make sure you have some nice chunky spaces that we're going to be filling. Now, in the original HQ step out for this tangle, the pattern is drawn with a nice inky centre and then lines coming out with some more dots around the outside. But my preference is a variation of this tangle, which makes it slightly more like a tangle called Pepper, but it's still very similar to the HQ step out. So I'm going to draw my favourite way of drawing it. I'm going to do this nice big inky splodge in the centre. In fact, let me show you this one here. A nice big inky splodge in the centre because this is sitting on top. And then out from the centre of here, we're going to bring a little line. So a nice curved line out to the side. And then we're just going to add a little bit of weight to that. And then we're going to continue that. My lines are curved. You can do them curvy or straight if you prefer. And just adding that little bit of weight on the outside really is a nice kind of touch to give it a little bit more depth and drama. I suppose the original step out does have that inky sort of dot at the end, and it's a little bit similar in that way. But rather than a dot, we've just got a little bit of line weight on the end there. And my lines are all spaced out fairly evenly around the centre, like so. And then I'm going to just repeat that on all of the rest of these orbs that I've placed down. So just taking my time and inking some little spaces at the end to sort of glue those lines on to the edges. Sort of anchoring that line to the side. And this one is obviously overlapping, so I'm not going to do an inky one right to the edge there. These inky kind of spaces are sticking themselves to the edges of each orb, so if their orbs are overlapping or tucking underneath, then you wouldn't necessarily be able to see them. And we're just having to employ our hollyball technique here, and just having a think and sort of in some ways using our imagination about what you'd be able to see and what you wouldn't. So as an example, you can kind of imagine this orb going round here and the inky weighty space would be beneath here, so I'm not going to add too much weight to that one. And you can really just interpret this however you like. I mean, with any pattern in Zentangle, there are lots of different ways that you can draw it. There's lots of options. And at the moment, all of my lines are pretty much coming out in a similar sort of curve to each other. But there's nothing to say that you couldn't make them come the other way. So this way, for example. And you can have a play around with how that changes the way that your pattern looks and what you prefer. Also, you don't have to have your dot right in the centre. You can play around with having it sitting in slightly different locations on your orb. So as an example, this one's going to go here, which is very much not in the centre, but it kind of gives it a different look. Now, as I said, this is quite similar to a tangle called Pepper as well, I think, which is another HQ tangle. And I will do another video on that one at some point in the future. This paper is extremely delicate and is picking up lots of fibres on the end of my micron. And shading it is interesting. So I may not be able to do quite as much shading as I'm used to on this paper because it does sort of dislodge the paper fibres slightly. Now with this one I've gone all the way around with my lines, and I'm going to go back in and add the weighting after. And I can add it just to where I think it's visible from beneath the other pebbles. But this is nice, it kind of reminds me of a big pile of mint humbugs. Mint boiled sweets. The other thing I've done with this tangle in the past is to almost hook this line over the edge. So if you bring it round and hook it sort of outside the edge of this line, that's quite an effective way of making it look like these stripes are hooked around your orb, which is a nice variation. But we're nearly there now, and then I'm going to show you how I like to shade this tangle. And again, as with any tangle pattern, there's always multiple different ways that you can shade these patterns. For example, the step out that I had a look at, the kind of one of the official step outs, has shading almost at the bottom of each of these sort of discs, which is an option, but I'll show you one of my favourite ways to shade this Festune tangle. I'm going to just add these little bits of weight. And when I did my introduction video, I said I was going to be using mainly graphite to shade, but having used this paper now for a little bit more, I'm finding that the General's Layout pencil provides a nice deep black, or deeper black than the graphite, and it's slightly more easy to blend on a soft surface, and also it almost sort of blends itself. So I'm kind of going around the bottom just of this one, and you can use that as your option for kind of the depth here, but I'm also going to bring it round the top section, right around the outside of each of these orbs, and then also around the inside. And I am going to have to be more subtle than I normally would do because this paper is so soft. So I'm just going right around the outsides and then in the centre. And then I'm going to come back on a second pass and just investigate shading and giving it another pop of shade to kind of create depth and layering amongst these orbs. So for the moment the shading is happening to the orbs themselves, and it kind of gives a really interesting effect whereby it looks like they are rounded discs, I think. And I'm just really gently manipulating this graphite because the paper is so soft. You can see bits of it kind of coming off as I use the tortillon, and a lot of the ink starts to move around as well on this paper. May have not have been the best choice for doing this little series, but here we are. So I'm just gently softening this graphite. Doesn't take much to just take the edge off of this harsh lines of graphite. This one I missed the centre. And then you get a nice sense of depth there. And I'm just going to go back in again and add another bolder line of graphite just around some of these where they overlap their neighbours. Now I don't want to go crazy with this because I want to ensure that we retain some highlights on our Festune. But this one in the centre, for example, you know, that is kind of overlapped by lots of different of these discs, so it's easier to kind of be able to fill more of it in, I think, with graphite. And I'm going to just come around the outside as well, on the ones at the bottom here, because although in Zentangle we don't tend to think of light source as being particularly, you know, something to think about in shading, actually sometimes it is quite nice just to add a little bit of extra depth. That you can really see I'm always picking the fibres off the paper here. So I'm just very, very gently softening this because I don't want to ruin the surface. Very gently around the bottom edge there as well. And that will give you an idea of this first day of Inktober. There is my little pile of Festune there. So I'll write at the top that this is day 1 and this is Festune by Zentangle HQ. Thank you so much for joining me for this little video. I hope you enjoyed watching me draw this pattern, and I will see you tomorrow for day 2.